associate professor at Rennes University. So, Tairan, you have 45 minutes for your presentation, and then there will be a round of questions.
Okay.
It's up to you.
So, hello, everybody. It is a great pleasure for me to present to you after 3 years of hard working my PhD thesis entitled The One-Man Crowd Towards Single-User Capture of Collective Motion Using Virtual Reality. The general context of this thesis involves crowd simulation and crowd modeling that serve various applications in our world, which can make our world better and safer. For example, simulating crowd evacuations helps to improve the public safety. And then in the industry of film and video games, the crowd simulation helps create and populated scenes and improves the story immersion. And recently in the robotics, there emerges a new tendency of applications that involves intelligent interactions between human and machines. And all of these applications relies on the performance of crowd simulation, which cannot go without the support of crowd data. Up to today, most of the existing crowd dataset only contain 2D trajectories, based on which crowd simulation approaches have been created, and we can broadly categorize three types of approach. First is the classical simulation, which uses the data of crowd to create mathematical equations and then use the data to calibrate the parameters of the simulation. And second, we have data-driven methods which search and use crowd datasets from a large database to simulate pedestrian trajectories. And then with the rise of deep learning, a lot of recent studies have chosen to use crowd data as the training material to feed their neural networks. And recently there's a new trend of simulating not only 2D trajectories, but also low-level details of crowd movements. For example, we want to simulate the pedestrians' movement, including what they're looking at and how they're walking. But doing such high-quality simulation would require high-quality crowd data, which is still scarce in our world. The scarcity of such high-quality data is mainly due to the challenges and limitations in the existing crowd data collection methods. For example, to collect the crowd data, one straightforward idea would be to film videos from our daily life of crowds and then retrieve the data from the video. But the concern here is that we don't really know what are the pedestrians doing exactly, and we don't know why they're doing so. So this would make the data set incomplete and less valuable. And on the other hand, we can consider capturing crowd data in the laboratory condition. And in this condition, there will be more easier ways to capture crowd data because the experimenters will have time to equip the participant with stuff. And more importantly, we know exactly what the pedestrians are doing because we ask them to walk like in some ways. But then the problem here is that we don't really know, we know, but we need time and money to build up systems to capture the crowd movement and data that we specifically want to capture. And as a result, the data remains scarce. And recently, with virtual reality becoming more and more popular, there's more and more researchers moving their studies into the virtual world. And usually by immersing human users into a virtual crowd. However, most studies have chosen to capture only one user's movement in the experiment, resulting in data of one single user, not at the level of the crowd. So considering this general context, we believe that it is necessary to find new solutions to capture such data. And at the same time, this solution should be cheap and easy to use. For this reason, we consider using virtual reality as a platform to capture crowd motion data. And then in the response to the need of high quality crowd data, we seek to capture not only the classical 2D trajectories, but also the body motion the body movement of each crowd member. And as I just mentioned, most of VR-based experiment actually use the experiment to capture one single user, resulting in one person's data. But here we seek to capture multiple people's data as well. And at the end, of course, we also want the captured data to be realistic enough and comparable with the real-world situations. I will present our two main contributions of this thesis pursuing this goal, but first let's take a deeper look into the state of the art. Retrieving crowd data from field observation relies on computer vision techniques. Sun and colleagues have summarized the principal pipeline of retrieving data from video sequences, which shows that the main focus is on detecting pedestrians and combining the detection with the existing tracks to form continuous trajectories. And they also summarized some milestone works which marks the evolution of this approach. And then in the past decades, data from field observations has contributed several data sets that are influential, such as the ETH UCY dataset and the Grand Central Station's dataset. And this dataset mostly contain 2D trajectory for the pedestrians. Using this data, researchers have improved the crowd simulation methods, especially for the data-driven methods and machine learning-based methods. But the problem here is that collecting and publishing crowd data from the public world, sometimes it causes legal and ethical issues. So at the end of the day, we don't have that much data from the field observation. Conversely, controlled experiment allows to capture crowd movement in a high-quality manner. In the laboratory condition, the experimenters will have the time to equip the participants with materials such like a hat with special colors and with a QR code, or in some case, which is based on the optical solution, they can put reflective markers on the head of the participant. And this maneuver can effectively facilitate the tracking of pedestrians. As Xu and colleagues have summarized in their survey, researchers are particularly interested in studying a number of standard crowd movement scenarios, including single file movement and ingress and egress movement through bottlenecks and corridors, and for some case, unidirectional flow and multi-directional flow. Typically, experimenters obtain the participant trajectory data from the capture. Based on this data, researchers managed to study the characteristics in the movement of the pedestrians, such as speed, flow, and local density. And in terms of crowd simulation, this data can be used to validate the realism of some classical simulation method, or to calibrate the parameters for the simulations as well. It is also important to note that the crowd movement is not just about walking through a group of people using your feet, but in fact, pedestrians are constantly interacting with each other using their body language and facial expressions. And if you just take a look at the 2D trajectories, you don't really see these interactions because it's a 2D trajectory. So recently, a new trend has emerged in which experimenters use on-body motion captures devices to capture body motion data for the pedestrians. For example, Houston and colleagues capture the pushing behavior in crowd, and Feldman and Chatagnon with their colleagues have studied the propagation of pushing in crowds. But it's also important to note that this maneuver requires a lot of money to purchase the motion capture devices, and eventually it will increase the amount of work for preparing such experiments. As VR becomes more and more popular, some researchers are moving their experiment into the virtual world to take advantage of the benefits from the virtual reality, which somehow solves some of the aforementioned difficulties. In the literature, the mainstream approaches immerse a single user in a virtual world to study how the user interacts with the virtual crowds. And during such experience, experimenters can capture data such as position and body motion and even eye gaze of the participants. And then the high controllability and the flexibility of virtual environment allows us to design different experimental scenarios and use them to study participant interaction. It also allows us to immerse participants into some scenarios which can be dangerous in our real life, for example, the fire evacuation. Note that in most of these cases, the researchers have used crowd simulation to create the virtual crowd that their participants have to interact with. So in summary, we have reviewed the 3 approaches to collecting crowd-related data. Each of them has advantages and disadvantages. Field observation allows us to capture pedestrian behavior in its most natural status. And technically speaking, field observation covers all possible crowd scenarios thanks to the widespread use of a camera. But the concern here is it is difficult to control the quality of the field videos, and more importantly, there are too many unknown factors which make it difficult for us to understand what the pedestrians are doing and why they're doing so. And the controlled experiment can effectively overcome these difficulties, but controlled experiments are usually expensive and cannot cover as much as real-world scenarios due to logistical and ethical challenges. This is also an important reason why studying crowds in virtual reality is becoming more and more popular, because virtual reality makes the studies cheaper and safer. But making the solution cheap, well, this would mean that you have to have only a single user in the experiment. I'm not saying it's not possible to have more users in the experiment, but that would make the experiment expensive again. So a single user would mean that the user have to interact with the virtual crowd, which is based on simulation. But the problem of simulation is that if it is already perfect, why would we still capture data from humans, right? So in this thesis, considering this, we seek to capture a full crowd containing only human data by using the advantages of virtual reality. More precisely, we have made 2 contributions in this thesis. First, we proposed the one-man crowd paradigm and validate its use for the capturing realistic crowd behavior. And second, we used the simulation to address the limitations of the original one-man crowd paradigm. Well, now, after such a long build-up, I will present to you the one-man crowd paradigm, the first contribution of this thesis. Well, the core concept of the one-man crowd paradigm is to immerse a single user in the virtual environment multiple times, and each time we embody the user as a different character and record the user's movement. So whatever the user does, it becomes the movement of the character in the future. And I will use this video to illustrate the process. Now here on the left, you have the user in the real world with wearing a VR HMD and a motion capture device. And this allows us to immerse the user into the virtual world. And in the middle, in the center, in the virtual world, you see a bunch of characters. And there is one character with a red highlight, which is the avatar of our user. And on the right, I show the user's first person view, and you can see that the user actually sees a bottleneck in front of him, and there's a red line on the ground. So in the first trial, we ask the user to pass through the bottleneck until he passed the red line. And during this process, we record the user's data, the motion and animation, and then we're going to reuse it. And now we enter the second trial, and you can see there's another person walking in the bottleneck. And that person is actually displaying the data, the animation of the user that we recorded during the first trial. And then we pass in the third trial. And you can imagine that there will be 2 moving characters, and they're displaying the user's animation during the first and second trial. And then we let this process continue so that the user can generate motion animations for each of the characters standing in the virtual scene. And we have in total 24 characters in the scene, so there will be the user will have to walk 24 times until he generates motions for everybody. By doing so, we record not only trajectory data, but also the animations of body motion. And the time complexity would be somehow around 0.1. And here is a simple representation of the process And the key point is that we transform the task of capturing an entire crowd simultaneously into capturing one person's motion at a time. And but there will be a small issue if we do things like this, is that we use the same user to collect the motion, to capture motion repetitively, and the user might repetitively perform the same strategy unconsciously, which might lead to some unrealistic behavior at the end. So we consider another approach, since we have already separated the capture into multiple iterations. We can involve one different user each time in each iteration, and this would mean that we would have to find n users for n captures for n characters motions. So we refer to the first procedure as the S2N procedure, standing for single user to capture n characters, and the second we refer it to as the N2N procedure, standing for n users to capture n characters. And since the one-man crowd is a brand new attempt, there's no existing evaluation on its performance. And our goal is to make sure that this paradigm is capable of capturing data that reproduce realistic crowd movements. So we have three hypotheses. The first is that at the individual level, the OMC data will show qualitative similarities to real data. And meanwhile, we presume that there may be quantitative differences due to the use of VR devices, but we don't seek to quantify this difference in this work. And similarly, at the collective level, we expect to see that the OMC will allow us to capture realistic emergent patterns from the crowds, but with the concern that the user might repetitively do the same thing, perform the same strategy. We also expect to see some special patterns generated by the user during this process. And following from this expectation, the third hypothesis focuses on the comparison between the S2N and N2N procedures. And we assume that the N2N procedure contains more behavioral diversity than the S2N, which allows to compensate for the S2N procedure. To verify this hypothesis, we choose to replicate three well-known real-world experiments, including a unidirectional flow scenario, a bottleneck scenario, and an inflow scenario in which people enter a virtual elevator and take a standing position. We reconstructed these scenes in the virtual environment with the same configuration, same parameters, so that we can capture the same movement and eventually compare our data with their data. And for each scenario, there is a unique emergent pattern. For the unidirectional flow scenario, it is the propagation of the high and low speed wave. We call it the stop and go wave. And for the bottleneck scenario, it is the lane formation as people walk through the bottleneck. And then for the inflow scenario, the pattern is the choice of position for each pedestrian. We have recruited 8 participants for the two first scenario, and then 9 participants for the inflow scenario, resulting in 9 S2N data sets. And then we ask each participant to participate in the same capture of one N2N procedure for each scenario, resulting in one N2N data set for each of the scenarios. So during the experiment, the participant first signed the consent form, and we then equip them with a VR headset and with a large field of view and a motion capture system. After calibrating the system, the participant will undergo a trial of N2N capture for each of the 3 scenarios, and then they will undergo a full S2N capture. After this, there will be questionnaires and the debriefing. So to evaluate the unidirectional flow scenario, we follow the same analysis as Lemercier in their paper. Let me first show the results of the real data. The video in the middle shows the position of each participant from a bird eye view. And the video on the right shows how the position of each pedestrian changed with respect to time. And the 2 videos are synchronized. And since the pedestrians are walking along a circle, we can simply describe their position using the angular position theta. And then by plotting the relationship between angular position and time, we can visualize the propagation of the stop and go wave. Here you see the red line which indicates the propagation of the high-speed wave along the circle. And then you can also see a blue line, which indicates the propagation of the low-speed wave along the circle. So we do the same analysis on the result of the OMC capture, especially S2N results. We get quite similar results, which are basically visually similar. So in the animation on the left, you may have noticed that there have been interpenetrations between characters and characters. And that's actually a normal situation in our case because the characters' animation were captured during different iterations. So at some point, there will be the first person to be captured, and then there will be the last person to be captured. And when the first person's animation was captured, the user didn't see the last person. So basically, in his movement, it doesn't show it's not interacting with anybody. And then we follow the several analyses in the work of Lemercier to evaluate the individual behavior. Among them, the fundamental diagram is the most important matrix because it reflects how fast a pedestrian can move according to the pedestrian local density. So we plot all the S2N results together to observe that each participant has a unique fundamental diagram. And then if I just mix all of these results and compare it with the end-to-end procedure's result, you can see that the end-to-end results form a curve which locates in the center of the S2N's results. This indicates that the end-to-end does have the effect to average the pedestrian's behavior. And then we compare the end-to-end result with the real data. You can see that this comparison shows quite a lot of similarity between the end-to-end result and the S2N result. So basically, combining this and our evaluation on the emergent pattern, our conclusion is that for the unidirectional flow scenario, our OMC paradigm can effectively capture data that are qualitatively similar to the real situation. And in the bottleneck scenario, the situation is more complex than in the unidirectional situation because people in the crowd must eventually pass through the bottleneck no matter where they start. And this creates interactions from not only the person in front of us, and also the people who are walking aside us on the left and right. And in the context of our one-man crowd paradigm, this makes the situation even more complex because this interaction will be a one-way interaction, which means that only the user can interact with the characters, not backwards, because the characters, any characters that is moving in the scene, they are basically displaying the animation of the user in the past. Despite all these challenges, we successfully captured the emergent pattern of lane formation during with the process of one-man crowd. And you can clearly see the formation of two different lanes in the bottleneck. But meanwhile, we also captured some different patterns by using the S2N procedure. Here you can see that most of the people just politely walk to the end of the lane and wait there, and there's only one lane formed. And we believe this is due to the fact that the user has been unconsciously repeating the same strategy over and over again. Again, the second part of our analysis focuses on the pedestrian dynamics by following Lido's work. And they use a different type of fundamental diagram which reflects the relationship between the local density and specific flow. And the specific flow is a metric often used in the context of crowd movement in bottlenecks and the corridors. It describes that if the width of a corridor is 1 meter, how many people can we evacuate during 1 second? So basically, the 2D fundamental diagram shows how fast we can evacuate a crowd of a certain density. And through this figure, we again observe that the OMC results show similar tendency compared to the real data. Only that this time we observe a difference in value between the OMC results and the real results. But, well, this is also some sort of expected situation. So basically, our observation in this scenario is consistent with the scenario of the unidirectional flow. And the last scenario that we replicate is an inflow scenario. The crowd is entering a virtual elevator and then choose a place to stay. And among the estimate results, we observe some that are like the real results, and some others that are shows special patterns. You can see that the squares in the results, and here is the real result. And again, we believe this special pattern is due to the fact that the crowd is generated by only one single person, and who is repeating the same strategy all the time. And if you compare the results with the end-to-end results, you can see that the end-to-end results actually give us a similar shape of the distribution of each person's position. So this shows that the end-to-end procedure is still capable of compensating for the behavioral diversity, which is lacked in the S2N results. So considering our observations and results, we validate our three hypotheses, leading to the following general conclusions. First, our replication of the first of the three real-world experiments are successful and has obtained the results that are qualitatively similar with the real-world situation, despite some quantitative differences. And second, our result confirms that the S2N procedure may lead to specific crowd patterns and specific pedestrian dynamic features that are unique to the user, whereas the end-to-end procedure mitigates such bias. We particularly point out that the S2N and the end-to-end reflect two different emphases, where the S2N allows us to simplify the capture process to its extreme, and the end-to-end allows us to capture the highest behavioral diversity. And we can further imagine an M2N procedure involving M users, which is larger than one user, and less than N users, which offers a balance between the experimental burden and the level of realism in the captured data. Overall, the OMC paradigm is a new option for constructing crowd data set that involves not only 2D trajectory data, but also rich data such as body motions. However, when capturing multi-directional crowd movement, we observe two main limitations. First, as is shown in this video, at the beginning of the capture, the thing is basically empty, so the user tends to walk straight forward. But we're actually trying to capture a scenario where you have people, come and go from multiple directions. So it would be super weird if the person just seemed like that he's not aware of the people around him. And then the second limitation is that if you look at the second video and follow the arrow's lead, at some point, the user experiences unavoidable collisions, interpenetrations with the other virtual characters. This is because the other virtual characters are basically displaying the animations and they're not responsive to the users. So in our second contribution, we're going to tackle these two limitations. And first, remind that earlier in this presentation, we have mentioned that most of crowd studies in virtual reality have chosen to include a single user to interact with the virtual crowds that are driven by simulation. And in comparison, in our OMC paradigm, we're not even using simulation. And not using simulation means that we give up a lot of potential benefits that we can have by using virtual reality to conduct these experiments. So in this second contribution, we aim to combine the best of the two to address previously mentioned limitations. Our primary goal is to capture crowd motion data set containing multiple pedestrians as well. And to avoid having the users walk alone in the scene, we propose the concept of a contextual crowd, which is a group of autonomous agents that walk around the user driven by simulation. I'm going to use two videos to explain what is the contextual crowd. And what you're looking at here is the first trial of our original one-man crowd paradigm. And so during this trial, only the user is moving and the other characters are static. And now using the contextual crowd, every character will be moving even during the first trial. And apart from the user, all the characters are driven by crowd simulations. And this time you can see that the user doesn't walk straight forward anymore because she has to avoid the movement of the other characters. And in the original OMC paradigm, the user's goal is to replace one static characters per trial. And similarly, when using the contextual crowd, the idea would become the user to replace a contextual agent, characters each time. So we refer to the original paradigm as the record and replay process. For short, we call it a 2R process. And we refer to the use of contextual crowd as the 3R process, which stands for replace, record, and replay. Note that the contextual crowd doesn't have to be driven by simulation as long as we have a different way to make the characters moving, to make them move. So for example, in our thesis, we implemented two versions of the contextual crowd, including 3RS, 3RS standing for simulated context, and the 3RC, which stands for the captured context, which is reanimating the data that we capture from real world. Note that at the end of the 3R capture, all the contextual agent will be replaced by the user, resulting in a crowd motion dataset that still only contains human input data. And then to tackle the second limitation where the user experiences unavoidable interpenetrations with the other characters, we propose the strategy of local correction that locally edit the recorded trajectory to make the characters responsive to the user. This video is an example of the local correction strategy, showing the interaction between an OMC character and the user. The user have in the previous trial have already generated motion for this OMC character, and now they're going to walk and they're going to meet each other in the middle of the scene, like this. And by this moment, we use a simulator to take over the behavior of the OMC character, and you will see that the character slows down and to give the way to the user. And this will actually cause a delay on the OMC characters compared to its original trajectory. And here I use this cylinder to mark the difference, to mark where the OMC character should have been if the simulation takeover never happened. And then when the user gets far away from the character, we deactivate the simulation and we program the character to catch up with its original trajectory. So with this, we make the character responsive to the user's existence. And with this idea, we name this process as a 4R process, which stands for replace, record, replay, and responsive. So in summary, with the two new capture process, the 3R and the 4R, we now have established 5 experimental conditions. The first condition is the 2R condition. And in the first trial, there's only a user in the scene. And during each trial, the user captures movement to generate one OMC agent. Here, I'm using the word agent in our figures, but basically it stands for the same meaning as character that I've been using in this presentation. And then we have the 3RS condition. And the difference is that at this time, the scene will be full of agents even during the first trial, and the user's task is to one by one replace the simulated agents. And based on the same idea, we can also have a 3RC condition where the contextual agents are created by reanimating real-world trajectory data, which, well, this time makes the contextual agent non-responsive to the user. Well, then we can have the 4RS condition, and since we apply the local correction on each of the OMC agent, this will make all the OMC agents responsive to the user. And that would be the main difference between the 3RS and the 4RS. And then similarly, we can still have the 4RC condition where we can also apply the local correction strategy on the captured agent, making the captured agent responsive to the user as well. To assess the effect of contextual crowd and the local correction, we set up 3 hypotheses. The first is that the contextual crowd can effectively help the user to perform more realistic behaviors and at the beginning of the capture process. And the second hypothesis is that the simulated crowd and the captured contextual crowd, they have similar effect. And the third is that the local correction strategy can effectively reduce the user's burden to avoid collisions with the other characters during the capture process. But this might gradually modify the data generated by the user for the other characters. We designed 2 crowd scenarios that are regular in crowd research, that is a circle scenario and a crossing flow scenario. These two scenarios are replicated from real-world experiments so that we can compare our results with the real data. And each scenario has received 15 participants. Our experimental pipeline in this contribution remains similar to that of the first contribution. And this time we have 5 different experimental conditions. So we kindly invite all the participants to perform all of the 5 conditions within a random order. And then we separately evaluate the performance of the 3R and the 4R conditions. For the 3R conditions, we focus on the pedestrian dynamics again. Here I take the pedestrian speed as an example, and we study the evolution of a character's speed along its trajectory using a percentage to describe the character's walking progress in relation to its total distance traveled. The advantage of doing this is that we can easily establish a simple reference to describe each character's position. For example, 0% means that the character has just started walking, and 100% means that he has reached the end, and more importantly, the 50% means that the character is more or less in the center of the scene where the interaction is most intense. And here you have the 2R example, which contains an acceleration phase and a constant speed phase. And you have also the 3R example, where you can observe an additional deceleration phase, which happens around the 50% position, which means that this speed descent happened in the center of the scene, and is due to the fact that there are contextual crowd and the user have to interact with the contextual crowd. So if I aggregate all the participant results of the same condition, for example, the 2R condition, I can visualize the mean value and the standard deviation of the speed evolution. And now if I do the same thing to the real data, you can see a clear speed decrease phase in the middle around the 50% position, which differs from the 2R results. And in comparison, our 3RS result present a more similar speed evolution to the real data, and equally the 3RC condition. So this indicates that the 3R conditions can effectively mitigate the bias caused by the 2R process. And in addition, the 3RS can have the 3RS and the 3RC conditions can have quite similar effect. And then we further investigate the participant behavior during each trial, and that's where we find the reason why the 3R shows better results. Here I used another metric, the lateral movement, as an example. And the lateral movement indicates how much effort did the user put into the collision avoidance. And you can see that in the 2R conditions, the participants only behave tiny lateral movement in the first trials. And that in the 3R conditions, the pedestrians' behavior are somehow similar between the first trial and the last trial, showing the consistency in terms of the behavior of the user. This indicates that the 3R shows more, this basically indicates that we can validate our 3R conditions effect. And then to evaluate the local correction, we perform analysis on the 4R result. We first compute the number of collision, and the results shows that the participants indeed experienced less collision during each trial. But we also observe a higher total number of collision. This implies that the 4R process does not have the same effect as we have assumed. On one hand, it effectively reduced the task of the collision avoidance on the user's side. But on the other hand, the higher number of total collision in captured data indicates that the overall dataset quality was not improved. But despite this situation, we believe it is important to figure out how the local correction influences data generated by the user. So we separately investigate how frequent is the local correction triggered and at which position is the local correction triggered. Our finding is that on average, 30% of the OMC character will trigger local correction during each trial. And then in terms of the position where the local correction is triggered, we found that in the circle scenario, most of the local correction was triggered in the center of the scene, which is just as what we have expected. But in the crossing flow scenario, most of the local correction was triggered between 0 to 20% distance traveled, meaning that at the beginning of each trial, the characters are already located in the triggering zone of the local correction by the user. This implies that our parameter configuration for the crossing flow scenario is not optimal. So then we compute the difference between the OMC agent's trajectory after each trial compared to the original version generated by the user. This compute was done through the dynamic time warping method. And our finding is that this error, indeed, there is indeed an increasing error after each trial of capture. So with these results, we validate our two hypotheses concerning the contextual crowd and demonstrate that the 3R process can effectively improve the trajectory realism compared to the 2R process. And that both of the simulated context and the capture context have similar effect. And then regarding the local correction strategy, we demonstrate that it helps the user to walk more easily through the crowd, but it didn't really improve the data quality at the end of the capture. So our conclusion on this contribution is as follows. First, we extended the OMC paradigm by proposing the 3R and 4R process to overcome two limitations in the original version of the OMC paradigm. Second, we introduced two types of contextual crowd that have two different focuses. However, we also show that their effects are similar. And finally, our local correction strategy did not give us the results that we expected, but it did open several new research questions that can help us understand how to effectively improve this local correction strategy. Now that I have presented my contributions, it is time to make a general conclusion. So in this thesis, we proposed the one-man crowd paradigm, which is a novel paradigm for capturing human crowd dataset. We also explored various implementations of the one-man crowd paradigm. And in the first contribution, we proposed the S2N and N2N process by following the idea of record and replay the user's motion to collective crowd motion dataset. And then in the second contribution, we proposed the two new capture approaches using the S2N as the backbone. In the 3R approach, the user progressively replaces contextual characters. And in the 4R approach, we use simulation to locally take over the non-responsive characters' behavior so that they become responsible to the user. They become responsive to the user. And regarding the contextual crowd, we explored two types of contexts, and our results suggest that they have similar effects. We position our contribution as a brand new option for creating crowd dataset. And our S2N 2R procedure simplifies the capture of crowd data to its extreme by only involving a single user, whereas the N2N increases the complexity of experiment, but allows us to have a higher behavioral diversity. And then the 3R version of S2N procedure achieve higher level of quality while not increasing too much the difficulty of the experiment. And then by proposing the 4R version of the S2N procedure, we hope to subsequently improve the OMC paradigm's level of realism. Unfortunately, our attempt did not improve the quality of the captured data, which is limited by the performance of the simulation. And our work also has its limitations. First, the animation that we use to create the contextual crowd is a simple motion capture animation, and sometimes behave like a zombie under sudden speed control. They would behave like this. And this will limit the performance of the contextual crowd and may induce the user to perform unexpected behaviors. And second, in each of our experiments, we replicate real-world scenarios and directly use their data to compare our results. But due to some physical restrictions in our lab's condition, we can't perfectly replicate the same condition. So a better idea would be conduct our own real-world experiment to compare the data. And then third is that our evaluation only focuses on the 2D trajectory, but not on the animation that we captured from this procedure, which, if you think about it, the animation is actually quite an important element of this process, of this paradigm. And I'd also like to remark that the OMC paradigm can have an immediate application in the animation industries. During my PhD, we also created this demo animation of crowd in a pub, and the animation contains 40 characters playing different roles such as customers and waiters. And if I remember correctly, we mainly spent 2 hours or 1 afternoon to capture this animation. If you want to have the full video, you can flash the QR code. And the next step of this work would be to tackle the issue of low behavioral diversity from the S2N procedure by more profoundly exploring multi-user options of the OMC paradigm. An easy start would be searching for a number of user M with which the M2N procedure can reach the sweet point between the ecological validity and the cost of the crowd dataset. And then we can even explore a two-man crowd paradigm to effectively capture the pedestrian interaction in real time. And then for the long-term perspective, since we have been talking about metaverse a lot during these days, I believe it is, at the end of the day, it is still important to improve the quality of simulation. And one possible path to this goal would be to capture crowd dataset by using the one-man crowd paradigm and use the data to improve the simulation so that we can, the simulation can present more realistic behaviors. And then use the simulation, we improve our one-man crowd paradigm so that we can better capture the data. And this doesn't only involve the capture of body motion data. We can also consider capturing more data such as eye gaze and facial expressions and finger movements as well. And during this process, we would hope that we can capture the tiny interactions between pedestrians during their walk, which is lacking in the state-of-the-art simulations. And we can loop this process until the simulation will become one day perfect. And that is the all of my presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the very good timing and the very nice presentation. So it's time for the questions. Let's start with Bill Warren from Brown University. Bill.
Thanks, Tairan. It was a very nice presentation and a nice summary of your dissertation work, I thought, too. So I'm going to start with just a broad question about kind of the overall take-home message. In the introduction, you set out kind of 3 different goals for the one-man crowd. Like you're trying to achieve this for several purposes. One would be to try to create more immersive VR experiences or better graphical simulations for animation purposes.
Yes.
Another would be to create more kind of better stimuli for evacuation studies, right? So behavioral experiments on evacuation or pedestrian interactions.
Yes.
And the third would be to generate huge data sets for training deep learning simulation models. So my sense is that you did a pretty good job at satisfying the first one, the first goal. What's your evaluation of how kind of the state of the one-man crowd at this point satisfying those 3 goals?
So from my perspective, in the introduction, I mentioned all these 3 different categories of applications of the crowd simulation is to show to people how important crowd simulation is, and which is not necessarily the direct goal of our one-man crowd paradigm. And the paradigm, well, of course, the goal of our one-man crowd paradigm would be to capture data to serve all different possible usage of crowd simulation. But it is also important to keep in mind that it's actually a very first, I would say even naive step of the exploration in this direction. And it might be still a bit early to talk about the usage in the, generate massive data set for example, for machine learning stuff.
Yeah, so let me just dig a little deeper on that. So I think in terms of generating, because I think there's slightly different criteria for what success would be, right, in those 3 domains. And in the kind of experimental domain, right, you really want to have really good, realistic displays of how human interactions at the micro level actually work, right? Yeah. So you're going to use that to study pedestrian interactions and evacuation dynamics. Whereas for the deep learning thing, you need huge variety, right? It's like you don't want to have just a few trajectories really well reproduced. You need to have really realistic crowd behaviors, right, of many different kinds, right? Because you've got to have a lot of variation in the data set to train the model. So, I mean, can you satisfy both of those criteria using the one-man crowd principle, or does it force you to go to something like an end-to-end crowd for the big data?
An end-to-end crowd would mean
just lots of we have a lot of different individuals in your data sets. You'd have a lot of different variations in the way people move.
So the question is, I'm not sure I fully understood the question because the question was a bit long.
So for deep learning, let's say,
yes,
right, you would need to have a lot of variety in the style of pedestrian locomotion. Doesn't that force you to have lots of different human capture, right, rather than?
Yes, I would think so. I would believe so. But I would also believe that we're basically in the era of data at this moment, and everything, if we want to use machine learning on it, we need data on it. But the construction of data set, especially high quality data set, would be still limited. We can see for example, ChatGPT as a large language model. I couldn't imagine which amount of work they have done for the capture of data. I would imagine that if we want to achieve something at the end of the day, which, well, let's say some sort of animation GPT, which can easily generate satisfying animations for human crowds, we would also need such an quantity of data, and the capture of that. Well, somehow you have to do it at some point, and you have to accumulate your data little by little. And so this might not be a thing that we can achieve during this year or next year or even in 3 years. But I think the capture of the data should be continued like this until at some point we can have enough data to do so. And on the other hand, another option would be thinking about, for example, the reinforcement learning. There is imitation learning aside, which allows us to use small sample of data to improve the results of the reinforcement learning thing. So it can also be an option.
Okay, let me ask a kind of tactical question.
Yes.
It seemed to me that by choosing for chapter 4, right, for choosing the circle and crossing flow scenarios,
yes,
you're kind of jumping in the deep end of the pool, right? It's like, that's the hardest thing to get right.
Yes.
And so you were kind of, in some sense, doomed to fail by choosing those really hard scenarios with many, many interactions. Another strategy might have been to say, the one-man crowd seems to be perfect for like collective motion, right? Where there is a kind of causal flow of influence through the crowd in one direction,
yes,
right? So why jump into the deep end of the pool as opposed to building up gradually and seeing where it succeeds and fails?
Yeah, well, this is a really good question because it reminds me all the sufferance that I have during the 2 years work on this. Yeah, this is basically because once when the first contribution was published and showed in front of the community, for example, the visitors of our team, we get feedbacks like. So you have this person walking alone at the beginning, and what would be it like if you have multiple people walk together? And people are quite interested by the question, what if you have people coming from multi-directional? And for me, doing research is something that, you need motivations and you need feedbacks from people, and that was the most direct feedback from people. People are curious about the performance of the one-man crowd paradigm from multi-directional scenarios. So that's basically the reason I chose this to do it. And I didn't really think about whether I would fail at some point. Yeah.
So just to say, another approach would be to start with simpler scenarios, right, and build up to the point
yes,
that you start to fail, and you can kind of see why you're failing, right?
Yes.
But I'll come back to that. There's a related question in terms of, I want to pick at your use of the word hypothesis,
yes,
which I mentioned in my
yes,
evaluation.
I read that.
And so I study human behavior. So scientific hypotheses are usually based on some sort of theory, right? That's going to generate hypotheses and predictions. So you might say, I have a theory that pedestrian interactions are governed by something like a social force. And so that's going to make, I'm going to have a hypothesis, well, that human collision avoidance should follow an inverse square law, something like that. And, so that then would be a hypothesis that's motivated by some sort of theoretical considerations. And in your case, hypotheses seem to be kind of like just expectations you have based on your intuitions about, they're almost like the questions you want to answer rather than, because you can pose a question, will adding contextual crowds, improve the performance of the simulation? Well, that's a valid question, but you turn it into a hypothesis. Hypothesis 1 is yes, it will, and hypothesis 2 is no, it won't. It's kind of a trivial hypothesis, right? Mm-hmm. So why formulate this in terms of hypotheses as opposed to just questions you're trying to answer about different approaches to the method?
Yeah, well, I think, I'd like to mention that for a PhD student, one way to learn about doing research and writing paper is getting feedback from the society, the community as well. So we did the first paper with this kind of hypothesis in the paper, and we submitted it. We get a relatively good review of the paper, and literally nobody mentioned about the hypothesis stuff. And then when I went to the conference, the virtual reality conference, I saw people's presentation. Somebody used different types of hypotheses, and that's where I realized, there might be a tiny stuff about the hypothesis. But then, what I did in the first paper seemed to be okay, since nobody even really mentioned this as a problem. So we did the second paper in the same style. And at some point, we get some of the supervisors mentioned these problems as well. But eventually, the second paper also got a good review, and nobody really focused on this, the setting of the hypothesis. So that's how it forms. And at some point, I began to realize that there might be a different way, or a more appropriate way to form a hypothesis. But in the society of, let's say, precisely in the community of IEEE VR, the conference, people don't seem to really care about this.
And the usage may be different in different communities, right? I think that's a plausible answer. So, okay, so now I want to get to the question I'm really curious about, right? Is the contextual crowd seem to be a great solution, right, to solving this problem of how does the one-man crowd, initially there's the first few passes, you're not reacting to anything and people are just walking straight. So how do you make that more realistic? Excuse me. And the contextual crowd seemed to be a really good approach to that. And then I think you were surprised when you added interactive, right? Trying to get the acronym, the 4R method, yes. Right? When you had responsive crowds,
yes.
that actually reduced the similarity of the captured data to what you were observing in the human data sets. That there was more lateral movement. The deviations were harder to recover from, and so that raises the question to me is maybe the problem there is that we need a better collision avoidance model, right? So, because I think you used the ORCA model, which is really a path planning, algorithm that has kind of omniscient knowledge about every velocity of every agent in the scene, yes. Which a human in a crowd doesn't have, right? Yes. We're kind of embedded in a crowd. So, how would you improve that? So what's your next step, right, in improving that responsive contextual crowd, trying to improve the collision avoidance algorithm for that purpose?
So I think, of course, I think first thing I would do is to run some simulations. If I want to study a specific scenario, I would run some simulations. And at the end of the PhD, I realized that there are multiple crowd simulation models that perform differently under different scenarios. And you might just want to have choose an appropriate simulation algorithm for some specific scenario. And that's basically the trick that everybody's doing at the moment. So I would first, identify the scenario that I would study, and then I would run some simulation to see whether there are some specific crowd simulation methods that performs visibly better than the others, and then I might start by testing this, and that would be a temporal solution of this to answer this question. And then I think at some point I might need to include the use of a machine learning or deep learning based model to solve this problem, to tackle this problem.
So from someone who studies pedestrian behavior,
Yes.
That's an interesting answer, because what I heard you say is the models are going to be very context dependent, right? So maybe obstacle avoidance or collision avoidance is really different in a crossing flow scenario or a circle scenario or a bottleneck scenario. And from someone who's trying to model human behavior, that's the nightmare scenario, right?
Yes.
Because we're hoping that there are kind of simple rules that people follow, right, based on the visual input they're getting and the locomotor capacities that they have, that are going to generalize across scenarios, right? And so I would go for trying to find a collision avoidance algorithm or model that is pretty general, and rather than trying to model every scenario independently. But that's an open question.
Yeah. Well, intuitively, I'd like to pose a counter question on this question. That would be,
Okay.
So basically, we assume that pedestrians under different scenarios, they have the same tendency, they have some sort of a unified strategy. And but how do we really justify this? I mean, if you look at the data that we have currently, that would be 2D trajectory data. So you don't even know whether they, at some point, they have behaved as something which is scenario dependent. We don't really have this information to say yes or no on this question. So perhaps, first of all, this is at some point we might understand more about crowd behaviors and the pedestrian behaviors. We might see that there is indeed a difference. And second, well, I forget the second part of my answer. That is, I think we are still at somehow naive stage in terms of crowd simulation. So if we want to have some good results, we have to carefully choose a simulation algorithm, because all the simulations are capable of doing the one job. And again, I would like to use the example of ChatGPT, which is a single model which seems to be quite performing for all kinds of tasks, and which is based on the collection of data, a bunch of data, and the use of machine learning, well, deep learning. I'm not saying I believe that deep learning is the god of the world, but I mean, at some point, we might be able to design or create a unified model for crowd simulation, but it's just we have to be realistic at this moment that it's not the case yet.
For my world, it would be nice to have an interpretable AI model,
Yes.
right, rather than a black box that generates human-like behavior. So, all right, I've got a couple more minutes, I think, so I'll go with one more question. So this is about evaluation methods, right?
Yes.
And it was you did a great job at replicating different analyses of the different scenarios. The circle scenario with the traveling waves is a really nice example of it really worked, right? You really were able to reproduce that. The fundamental diagram, stop and go waves, those are all at kind of a macro level.
Yes.
And then there's also the micro level, which you talked about. And so again, for someone studying human behavior, I'm often trying to compare individual trajectories, right? So I've got a human trajectory in my data with the initial conditions of the position and the velocity and the speed of, that subject, and then the neighboring subjects or neighboring avatars around it. Can I then predict what that human is going to do, if I have the same initial conditions? And so in the contextual crowd case, I guess this is a question, did you actually do that? So you could take the circle data set that you had, right? Use that to drive your contextual crowds, and then have your human subject your user in the same initial position, and kind of assign the user a initial velocity that would match, right, that data set, and then compare trajectory to trajectory, for the same initial conditions with that data set, how accurate or how similar the user's trajectory was with the trajectory in the original data set. So was that what was behind the, I'm trying to remember the technique that you used. Oh yeah, the DTW comparisons between trajectories. Like, did you really replicate the initial conditions for that data set?
I'm not sure I have understand. The question would be if we do some sort of experiment we have where we create the contextual crowd with real data, and then we put the user inside it, replacing some existing person, and we want to see whether the user is going to create the same trajectory at the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have at some point in some pilot experiment where I tested ideas like this. Actually, there was some sort of contextual crowd which is not created by real data, but some sort of a one-man crowd data that we captured earlier, and we put the same person again into the scene again, and we want to see whether the person is able to create the same trajectory. And our results, my observation was that it can actually differ a lot. Mm-hmm. In which sense? In the sense that the user, at the first time, the user we even show the original trajectory in front of the user, but the user, it's just so difficult for him to follow the trajectory. And the user seeing all the people coming around him would hesitate, would let the other go first. So which create a delay directly since the beginning, which makes it impossible to compare the trajectory at the end. So yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I'll give up my microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. So the second referee is Anthony Steed from University College London. Anthony?
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tairan, for the summary, and I enjoyed reading the thesis, and as I've written in my report, I think it's a great contribution to the field.
Thanks.
I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum to Bill in that Bill studies people, I study VR, so my questions will sort of be somewhat a bit technical. Though I did have a reaction to one of Bill's comments, which is that we should bear in mind that one of the claims behind virtual reality is that it's great for investigating sort of emergency scenarios, things that are difficult, dangerous, or imaginary, and evacuation simulation is one of those simulations, which I think is really important. So if you can, it's not a question, it's just a comment that if you can work in that domain, you can make a huge impact, especially if you can improve upon the simulations or point out problems in the simulations, because there's a spin-off from my university that does crowd simulations that protect, for example, the Olympic venues in 2012. So yes, it's a good motivation, more so than VR. VR is already very good. Right. So just recommend that to you or in the future work. Okay, so I'll start off with some technical things about the virtual reality. Now, you've done this on one VR system. You've used a very wide field of view head-mounted display in your studies, but what is the impact of the virtual reality on your research? Both experiments, I think you could draw from, because it's not. Despite what we think, it's not like real seeing. The periphery is either blurred or distorted. So what impact do you think that could have had on your results?
So the question is, choosing a different VR headset with a different configuration, would that impact the result of the research?
Yes.
Well, I have to be honest that we didn't study this how the use of different type of VR headset would impact the result of the data. But from what I say, the first thing would be that the restriction on the field of view with a regular VR headset such as a Quest or something, or even the Apple Vision Pro, would make it difficult for the user to perceive people around them, and which is and that would make people fear at some point. They wouldn't be brave enough to walk ahead because they would imagine we suppose that there's virtual characters working around them. So this may lead to very stressed behavior in the data that we would eventually get.
Could you be more specific about the types of thing you might see? For example, in the circle following task, does it make a difference because the target's right in front of you?
Well, a very direct, a very intuitive response is that the people for the circle scenario specifically, the user would realize that there are people just on the right and left of him, but without seeing them, the user would hesitate to walk. So he would basically wait when everybody starts to walk until he sees that everybody is already in the center and around him, the space around him is cleared. So this would cause a huge hesitation on the user's behavior. Basically meaning that the user wouldn't even participate in the interaction with the crowd because they just fear.
Okay, so there's the circle. So there's the circle crossing one. That's the sort of was going to be my follow-up question. That one's very sort of obvious because everything happens at 180 degrees, 90 degrees to your left and right. So you really need to be able to see the side. Did you consider using a cave system?
A cave system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, honestly, I would like to do so because the cave system really seems so cool, but unfortunately, that would require a lot of work. By work I mean the communication with the operator of the cave and stuff, and prepare for and the paperwork and stuff. So during the PhD, I didn't have the time to test it. And on the second thought, there's also the cave system is usually not large enough for us to perform the crowd movement. So basically, as you can see in my thesis, the crowd movement covers a 10 meters by 10 meters stone. And that's basically the physical limit of our, that's the physical request on the scenario, and that's the physical limit that we can reach. We couldn't do things beyond that. So cave is usually smaller than that, so that would be a bit problematic.
Okay, future work for somebody. There are caves big enough, but there are probably two in the world. Okay, so let me re-ask the first one, which is in the wave, in the one-man crowd, you've got this scenario where you follow the person in front, right? Can you research that one with a quest? Because you are only looking in front, right? So you're following the person, and because I'm trying to get it. What do you recommend about VR for people studying this field? Right? Does everybody need to use the Pimax because it's not possible to purchase it at the moment? Right? Do you need, if somebody said, "Oh, I want to study this, but can I use the Vision Pro?" Would you say yes or no, or would it depend on the scenario?
I think it depends on the scenario, and if indeed, as you said, for the circle scenario where people follow each other, using a headset with a lower field of view would make sense. I don't think there will be too much I don't think there will be too much significant difference between the use of the Pimax and or a Quest.
Okay, right. So I'm going to differ with you on that one because I think that crowd formation is somewhat dependent on how you see yourself in the space, right? So I think you've mentioned this at some point in the review, though it's a while since I read the document in detail. So how did you represent participants to themselves? Did they have a self-avatar, and did it look like themselves?
They had a self-avatar, which is from the Rocketbox dataset, Rocketbox. So it wouldn't look like them at all. But from the experience, people see their hands, their arms, and their body, their bellies, and usually no more than that. We didn't make any evaluation on how people feel embodied into the character and how people would whether they had the feeling of being immersed in a different person. We didn't really evaluate that. So
okay, so it's interesting you mentioned bellies, right? Because that needs a very large field of view vertically.
Yes.
Right. So, so let me tell you my hypothesis. Right. In reaction to yours, we're doing a bit of science that you need to see your own feet for some of these scenarios, and that may be the limitation. Is that VR? You don't see your own feet. You did mention, for example, this walking short phenomena in virtual reality in your review. I was very pleased that that came up in your thesis. So, do you need in the lift scenario? I'm expecting people are looking at their feet and wanting to see their feet. Do you agree, or would you? Is this it? You know, what do you feel about that? So, it's not a very specific question, but do you think that's important to see your own feet in these scenarios?
I want to bring us back to the animation that we have captured for the lift scenario. You may notice that. Well, I don't have the impression that too much people, the person looked at his feet for too long times during the capture. So, they might see the feet of the person in front of them. That would be an important visual cue for the user to perform his own movement. But I don't really have the impression that the person focused on his own feet during the experiment. Right.
Okay. But one advantage you have in motion capture is you can tell, right? You can tell if people are looking up or down more than you would expect in order to confirm, for example, where exactly they're standing. It's just an advantage you do have compared to other methods that only do 2D, because I'm quite interested in that. For example, we can focus on this video since you brought it up. It's a bit jumping around, unfortunately. That actually. There's much more here than not to criticize your analysis. Your analysis is really interesting, and I think it's a good model for other people to follow. But there's so much more data here, right? Such as the body language of the shoulders. You know, are they looking at their feet? And what would you recommend about that? I mean, did you think about analyzing sort of stance and difference between head and body and things like that, or is there any advantage to that in the future?
I don't think I ever get the point of question. You seem to confirm that the Guaman crowd paradigm is already advantage. And
what could you do? What else is in your data other than where they stood? Right, your analysis is based on essentially the trajectory of the head, but what about the trajectory of the shoulders or the body or the feet relative to the head? Because you've got all of that data, but you don't appear to have studied it. Is there more to do by somebody else to analyze the data you've already captured? And would that be interesting?
That would be interesting. Indeed, that would be quite interesting. And that's something that I've been always feeling that is missed during the thesis, is that we have the 3D motion, body motion of each person, but we didn't really perform any analysis on this data. And the difficulty that I see, the challenge that I see here is that we don't really have too much established evaluation framework to do so. And that might be, so from my personal knowledge about the literature, I don't really know if there is a specific way to deal with the analysis of, I think they exist, it's just I didn't read them. But that would be my first challenge. But I would be interested to do so, of course.
As a PhD student, of course, you want to measure yourself against other people's metrics. Now you're probably going to be a postdoc. You can set metrics for other people to sort of compete on. Right, so this idea that you've now got this information and that other models don't, like the Orca model, right? Bill already touched on that it's not, and you already said that the best model might need to be customized. And I know that there is work, for example, in the crossing crowd scenario on body attitude. So somebody leads with the head but follows with the body, so that somebody might look to the left or right to indicate to other people that they're turning, whereas you've got the position of the head as the measure, right? So there's lots of other things there. I just think it's a rich area, and I don't know if you've made the data sets available, but this is again another advert for the VR part. Is that this is the type of data we can capture for free almost, and if you choose different systems, you get different. Obviously, if you did it with a Quest, you get less data. But if you did it with your system, you've got shoulders, hips, feet, which is all really interesting.
Yes.
Okay, that's one of my questions. Sorry. Right. Okay. I'm quite interested in a sort of technical check for the one-man crowd. I do think it's very important to know exactly the instructions given to the participants. And again, it's one of those learning things and experiments about reproducibility. So, for example, in the scenario of the lane forming, you said you did find 2 lanes, and then sometimes you didn't find 2 lanes. But to me, that depends more on exactly what they were told to do. Like, is this an emergency situation? Do you need to evacuate, or are you just leaving? Because these people on the left in the real world look like they're evacuating, right? They are. Yes. There's a bit of pushing and shoving. People are slipping in as soon as they can, whereas yours looks more like. Well, I was going to say leaving after a lecture, but that's often it's the first of the door in lectures. But so, is there any? What did you instruct the participants to do? The person to do?
I will need some time to remember the exact instruction during that experiment. But basically, what I said to the participants was that you see there is a red line on the ground, and you need to walk through the corridor and reach that place. And basically, and try not to collide with the other characters that are moving. We didn't mention I think it's important to mention this, but we didn't mention to the participant that they will be walking with themselves during the experiment. So basically, somebody would realize that they are walking with their formal animations, but somebody wouldn't. And the instruction that we gave them is basically you go there and try to avoid collision with the others, which is somehow, I think, a quite important reason where we finally observe this kind of specific let's say patterns or phenomena where they just line up, because this person, I think he's a very polite person, and during the capture he realized that it wouldn't be possible for the others to interact with him, so he has chosen to wait politely at the entrance of the bottleneck, and at the end the queue just grow up, and he just walked to the end of the queue. I think it's not only the instruction which matters, there is also the role of personality, which is quite important in results.
Okay. Yeah, I've got more questions, lots of questions about variance and so on. But I think this one in particular, is the person told to follow anybody else they see, or are they told to just cross the line again?
I don't think I have mentioned follow anybody. I just told them try to not collide with the others. Okay, right.
It's I mean, you fix the. I mean, it's very difficult for somebody to sort of jump in, right? Because it's not clear. It's not clear if the person is going to, if you push in, if the crowd that's already there or the line that's already there is. But this is the chapter 4 anyway. So the idea of interaction is the purpose. And I remember discussing with you at some other project meeting that the interaction is important, because if somebody jumps in, somebody has got to slow down, and as we've seen later on.
Yes, this makes me think about one thing which can be related to Bill's formal question about why did I start crossing stuff directly? Because if you think about this scenario where for the bottleneck, there must be a moment where the pedestrian the characters, they have to slow down to wait in front of the bottleneck. It's actually not that easy to make it happen, because you have to handcraft their behavior when the density of the crowd arises. And I don't think there's too much good model for simulating people's hesitation and waiting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm running. Already asked quite a lot of questions. There are a couple of ones I really want to ask. Because we focus a lot on the VR. I'm interested in a sort of rhetorical question that sort of follows up one of Bill's again, is it's not completely clear how you would have disproved similarity, especially looking at the types of flow diagram you're looking at. So there's one potential critique, and I think the way to ask it in a positive way is, which measures from the chapter 4 do you suggest people focus on in future work? So because you've got a very detailed analysis, and throughout it, I said there's nothing wrong with the analysis, but I'm sort of looking for what are the thresholds of similarity. There's a little bit of hand waving and saying, you know, if I take the n to n, it's an average of the s to n's, but that's almost a question of population sampling, diversity, and so on. I mean, I'm imagining your sample's quite homogeneous anyway. So let's start with that. So in the n to n, if you were to run it again with a different n, how different do you think the results would be? Right. So how much is your specific results dependent on the group that you chose, and is that group itself diverse?
Is that group itself what? I'm sorry.
Diverse.
Diverse.
Is it
okay.
Gender balance, different ages, different walking speeds?
I kind of feel that in this question there are two parts. The first is, how do I measure the similarity between the data, and the second is, how would will the captured data be still the same if we redo the experiment? Is that correct?
Yes. So I would expect a similarity measure to be more similar. For example, more similar if you ran n to n twice with two different people than if it was between real to n to n, for example.
Well, I would for sure answer you that I would believe that the results would be similar again. But since the question is how do we measure the similarity, I don't really see a direct response to this question. I don't see a direct answer to this question. Because for this moment, the statistical analysis seems to be the only option that I have. Mm-hmm. And since we're talking about statistical analysis, then we must gather a group of people and you let them do the experiment one by one. And at some point you reach a higher number of participation, then somehow you will bring, well, whatever the difference you will get for one specific person, at the end they will be brought back to the statistical level and you don't see the difference anymore.
Yeah.
But that's the difficulty that I see here.
Yeah, with large complex time series, it is, I admit it's difficult. It's a bit of a specialist area. I'm sort of more, so I wrote this in the report, and this will be my final comment really, is that there's a difference between the sort of quantitative work you've done and the qualitative feedback, the qualitative sort of response of people to the crowd, such as anomalies and so on. So an alternative way of doing it would be to look for specific types of events that you expect to happen or not to happen, and just look at the frequencies, right? But I think it's a really interesting question. It's a really interesting problem to have. Is now, and the only thing I would suggest is, if you ask, then is, what do you think is the most promising scenario, and the metric you would choose? So if you're going to pick another, if you're going to carry on, what scenario do you think really shows off your technique well, and what's the metric that you think it performs particularly well on?
So the question is, if I were going to continue the study on the same direction, what would be the next scenario that I would choose?
Yeah.
I think this time I will try to focus more on the crossing flow scenario, which is a quite good example of people. Well, it contains two specialties, the crossing flow scenario. The first is that you have people from moving into two different directions. And second is that it provides a continuous flow of people. So there are continuous interactions in the crossing area of the two flows, and that may be that can be a challenge to I would think about using the established framework to analyze the crossing flow scenario and apply them on the data again. And if you ask me to propose a new metric to prove that the one-man crowd data has is better than the other results, well, I don't think I have a clear answer at this moment.
Okay, all right. I've run over time, so I'll let the next person ask. Okay, thanks very much. Very good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. So it's time to ask the examiners. We start with Ioannis Karamouzas from University of California, Riverside. Ioannis.
All right. Well, I'm trying to figure out my questions here because many of them have already been asked. Okay, so give me like about 30 seconds. I thought like I was fourth. So let me try to see what makes sense. No, I think I'm good. It was more like, kind of like to sort them out in terms of priority and okay. Yeah, I'll go both like high level, low level, something somewhere in between. So let's start with a couple of technical questions. And they're more or less kind of like follow-up of what Bill was asking, right? So I want to go to the second paper or the second contribution and talk about the local correction.
Yes.
I think it was already mentioned about, you are using Orca, there may be problems. And I assume when you used Orca, you used default parameters. You didn't play with the parameters. You didn't adapt the parameters, right? I assume with adapting the parameters, you may get a better result. But my question is not that. Yeah, okay. My question is actually, do you think we need a better simulator or a better animation engine?
Okay.
Because I think like, at least, I'll let you answer that question, I guess.
Okay.
Or both. Maybe it's actually both, right? So.
Well, I think the obvious answer is both because none of them are perfect to date. So, but from my perspective, from what I have experienced during the PhD thesis, these two, the animation engine, let's put it this way. We see the importance of the simulation model and the animation engine in different phases during the local correction strategy. First, we want the character to be able to respond to the user's movement, and in some cases, you want the characters to somehow predict the user's movement and react quite in advance, and that's where you really need a good simulator. Because you don't want them to only stop when they walk in front of the user, and there's no more options. They have to stop. And then, if that works, there will still be situations where you have a character who doesn't really have too much choice. You have to stay in front of the user. You have to just stand there because the user is in front of him, and the other characters are behind them, so he doesn't have too much things to do here. And that's the moment where you have the need of a better animation engine, because in the simulation model would, I believe that it gives the characters some impulse of movement. Let's say at some point the simulation wants to make the character stop. At some point, the simulation wants the characters to move a bit, but well, it will switch between the two status, and that's why we see movements like this. It hesitated in a zombie manner, and that's the moment where you need an animation engine. So I think the two options are both important. It's just they are important in different.
So did you get any feedback from the participants about any of these things? I guess maybe the animation doesn't look that compelling, or I'm not even sure if I was interacting with real avatars, real think quotes, right, or simulated avatars. And
well, we did have a questionnaire about the social presence stuff, and we ask whether there is it's a simple questionnaire, including a question where we ask whether the user whether they think they are interacting with real people. And well, that's because since it's just a very broad question, and different people really have different definition about realism here in this experiment. So some people would say that, some people would tell me that the one-man crowd character, they seem to be real because their motions are real. And some people would tell me that they think the OMC characters are not real at all because they are just not responding to them. And they would choose to say that the simulated characters, they seem to be more real, because they are aware of the existence of the user. So so we did try to do some research on this aspect, but we didn't get a clear result because the question was not well set.
Okay, thanks. Well, since we have that slide, and Anthony also asked a lot of questions about what we're looking right now on the screen, let me follow up on that kind of journey here. So first is just a question to better understand at least the bottleneck experiment.
Yes.
In the one-man crowd, well, there's only one-man crowd approach here, right?
Yes.
Does the participant always start from the same place?
Always start in the same place,
Yeah.
meaning that?
When he's asked to reach the red line,
Yes.
does he always start in the middle of the bottleneck, or
No.
yeah?
So I think we have I think this snapshot already shows us the starting position of.
So the starting position matches the starting position of real world data.
Well, I wouldn't say it matches with the real. Well, that's the reason why I said the replication is not 100% perfect, because the real data. Well, in this specific data, we don't have the start position of each person. Their capture zone was at the entrance of the bottleneck. So what we did here is so I randomly generated the starting position within the waiting zone, which still aligns with the configuration of the real experiment. And then I randomly generated the start position, I let the.
No, I think you answered the question. I think for the economy of time, that was my first question, because I'm actually gonna let me pose the question here, which is related to what Anthony asked as well. What are the challenges that need to be addressed in order to be able to use the one-man crowd approach for, let's say, emergency evacuations, right? Collecting data for emergency evacuations, right? Because as you mentioned, and we can see it in the animations here, everybody seems so polite. But of course, that is not going to be the case as you're looking, the guys on the left. Everybody's rushing, there is, conduct, because they know they have to evacuate the building. So I guess does simply changing the prompt where you inform the participants that there is some sort of emergency evacuation scenario can create better results, or that can be used for emergency evacuation, so to speak, analysis or studies, or there are more things to do? Because I can see that being tricky. When you have only one person, okay, I guess you can tell them evacuate, but it's different than if that person is in the same room with 50 more people, right?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to mention that evacuation there are somehow two two different scenarios of evacuation. You have the emergency evacuation, you have a normal evacuation, right? That's what I found in the literature. So for the normal evacuation, we basically just ask the participant to go through the bottleneck, even in the real world experiment. And that would somehow, so in this case, the one-man crowd paradigm would be usable, I think. But I think you are more interested in the emergency evacuation where everybody sees the stress to get out of the bottleneck. And that, I think there are way more things to do in this stage, compared to the current stage of the one-man crowd paradigm. Because in this case, you have to somehow involve the pushing behaviors inside it. And you are, first of all, the characters must be able to be pushed by the user. And then somehow you might want the user to be able to be pushed. I don't see how we can do that, but so you have to have at least the pushing animations that are, some sort of convincing pushing animations as well, which is why I think at this stage of the one-man crowd paradigm, we're not able to tackle that, to explore that scenario.
All right, so how many minutes do I have? Okay, so let me, I may go back to technical, but let me go a little bit like high level.
Okay.
I guess, I think it was more or less mentioned probably by Anthony or Bill or both, like somehow like the thesis is between about, on one hand, you may want to create animations or simulations that match reality, and on the other hand, you have like that kind of like paradigm of creating compelling animations or simulations. And though like there seems to be a little bit of a fight between the two. Like I believe, let me put it like out there, I believe like that you can use one-man crowd and extend that and create really compelling animations. You had that example with the QR code, which I didn't have the chance to actually, download it. And you can create very quickly animations that, can be used to populate virtual worlds, right? And on the other hand, your goal may be, okay, I want to create really realistic simulation data such that can be used, to improve future models, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess like, what is like the goal of the thesis here? Is it both, is one of the two, and what actually do you like to do, regardless of the thesis?
Well, I think the goal of the thesis is more, stays more on the academia side of these questions, which means that we want to use the paradigm to create a data set to serve the understanding of crowd movement. But at the end of the day, I think when people hear about this idea of one-man crowd, and once they understand the idea, they figure out that it's quite a simple idea. It can be used basically anywhere. And I always tell people that for example, my first paper where we proposed the one-man crowd paradigm, people liked it because each reader see a different possibility of using the one-man crowd paradigm. So I think such simple ideas should be able to use for different purpose. And I would really like to see people of the world to know this paper and to figure out their own way to use it. And for me, the goal would be the goal is to see the limitations of the one-man crowd paradigm and pushing forward.
So I guess like, okay, if we're talking about this, like I know we had that discussion during lunch, fortunately or unfortunately, you guys only have 3 years to wrap up your PhD, right? So that's not a lot of time. Maybe that's a good thing, but, if you had an extra year, what do you think like is a good direction to work on? And already, people asked, different kind of questions. So do you have an idea what you would have liked to work on, but you didn't have the time to do that?
Well, at some point, I have been thinking of this idea where, so for example, in the first contribution, we have 8 participants in each scenario, and we get 8 S2N data sets for each scenario. and that's a data set containing different pedestrians generated by the same person. So somehow this data set contains one person's personality inside it. So maybe we can somehow extract some sort of this personality from that data, and you can transfer the personality between different set of the S2N data sets, and that's possible to improve the behavioral diversity as well. And that's at some point what I wanted to do.
Interesting. I had actually a comment here, like a little bit related to that. Like have you thought like some simple like approaches to add more diversity of, in the data, right? Like you could have some sort of like you take one of the trajectories, you do some sort of a genetic algorithm approach where you mutate a little bit. So it's a little bit different than it just like replaying it as it is, right? And maybe that helps a lot, right?
Yeah.
That creates a better, I guess, like experience for the user when that person has to interact with previously played trajectories, which are his or her trajectories, right? So, okay, so I will stop here. I have other questions, but I think like I don't want to keep changing directions. I think like those were the main ones that I had. So, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ioannis, for stealing all the last remaining questions. And good luck, Nuria Pelechano, for entering the floor. Nuria Pelechano from Universitat Politecnica de Catalunya. Nuria.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay, so first of all, I want to congratulate Tairan, because I think it's a really, really nice work. And it's
Thanks.
A very interesting topic. It's a very original topic, and also I really enjoyed reading the thesis. It's very well written, and it's very good quality work. So it's hard to be the fourth people asking questions because most of them have been already taken, but I might revisit some of them. So one of the very interesting things about running experiments in virtual reality is that it's exactly what you're trying to do, is you can learn about human behavior in a simulated scenario, because people tend to behave similar to the real world as long as you achieve high levels of presence and you have an environment that is plausible. So all these aspects that can help you to feel present in the virtual environment, to feel co-presence with other virtual agents and so on are extremely important. And in my experience, it's very easy to break this feeling. So for instance, we've run experiments where if there were any kind of animation artifacts, people will immediately notice them, and it will break presence, and then you cannot fully guarantee that users are behaving in this virtual environment as they would do in the real world. So do you think that any aspects regarding, for instance, the collisions you said that you experienced, especially during the experiments in chapter 3, or any issues with the animation that you mentioned from the XN system that has a positional drift that you had to correct? You could correct the positional drift, but then you introduce some kind of foot sliding. Do you think this could have affected in any way the realism of the behavior of your participants?
So the question is the technical. The question is the artifacts caused by the technical solution of motion capture, whether they would affect the user's behavior.
Yeah, both motion capture, animation. So issues with animation, and also issues with collision avoidance that you mentioned in the first experiment. The users at some points could not avoid the virtual agents and would end up walking through them or suffering or observing collisions. So both things.
For the first, so for the artifact caused by the motion capture, I think as long as the artifact is not too large, it wouldn't impact too much the user's behavior, the participants' behavior, because they are in a virtual crowd where people come and go from multiple directions, and their goal is to, well, even though it is impossible for them to avoid all collisions. Their goal is to somehow try their best to avoid collisions. So they're quite busy with the collision avoidance task. So the artifact in animation don't really, well, they might be distracted from the artifact of the animation. They won't even pay too much attention on it. For example, we have slippery foot. So basically, if you look at the animation, you can see that the character's feet, they're slippering on the ground. But in the VR, our participant can hardly notice that. So I don't think that's a big deal. But the collision avoidance can have a real impact on the participant behavior, especially when they begin to experience the collisions with the virtual characters. They will. I think it's a quite uncomfortable experience to be interpenetrated by a virtual character, because you're just working like that, and somehow all of a sudden there's something appearing in your face, and because you get collision with another character, and after that, I think people get tired, people get afraid of recreating the same situation, so they might hesitate more and more during the experiment.
Okay, so you observed they were more hesitant in the movements, maybe more precautious when they were.
Well, there can be two different effects. Either the collision make people hesitate, or the collision make people think that, well, these characters, they're not real anyway, so I don't care about them. I just crash on them and I do whatever I want. They can be on the two direction.
Okay, all right. Interesting. So continue with animations. I was wondering, you mentioned before that some people did realize they were walking at games that previously recorded animation. Some noticed that, some didn't notice that. But I think there's an in between. So, for example, your simulated data in chapter 5, because chapter 4 they're all recorded, but chapter 3 they're all recorded. Chapter 4, you're also using either a simulation or capture positions that then you play the animations on top. So I'm assuming those animations were probably motion matching just for the locomotion. Is that correct?
Well, that's not a motion matching. Motion matching is actually what we would like to have at the moment.
Okay.
But it was difficult to have motion matching at the moment as well, so we didn't.
Okay, so you had some basic locomotion movement that you could replay to get the characters animated. But one of the things with the basic strategies for locomotion is that typically characters have very little upper body movement. So I guess as you start replacing those characters by the ones that you have captured with Xsense, I was wondering if people could notice that some of the characters had natural upper body movements, whereas others looked a bit more robotic. So did you get any feedback on that? Could they tell the difference, or could they perceptually notice the differences in the upper body movement?
So the question is, the participant, could they tell the difference between the OMC agent which replace the captured animation from the user and the other agents that are using a local motion animation?
Yes.
And okay, I think they do, and at some point, they do. Well, it depends on the participants as well, but I think it's easier for the participant to see that the OMC characters have literally shoulder movement and head movement, making them seems to be able to perceive the environment. And I believe that the participant likes things like this.
Okay. And also, in line with that, I think Anthony already mentioned the fact that when we are doing collision avoidance in the real world, there's things such as, the way we move our body or upper body, or the way we gaze, and just tiny, almost unnoticeable movement that help the other person notice, exactly which side we're taking for doing collision avoidance. No? So maybe because they gaze quickly to the left, they're gonna avoid you through the left, or things like that. So in your case, this is completely missing because you're walking against a character that was captured in a previous iteration when you weren't there yet. So I was wondering whether these kind of tiny movements that imply how you're going to be moving in your next steps could lead to confusion to the participants in terms of collision avoidance. Did they have a lot of situations where they try to avoid in one side and then the virtual agent happened to go in the other side, and this just led to a kind of an inconsistent, continuous correction of their movement?
I think that's a quite interesting question. And my first answer is that at some point this happens, that the participant might misunderstand the character's intention. They might misjudge where the character is trying to go, and then they realize they're wrong, and they make a sudden movement to walk backward or something like that. But in most of the case, this doesn't really. This is not really a real problem. I wouldn't say this. It's in most of the case, the participant would be somehow able to understand where the characters are going, and they are actually making the right judgment. And more interestingly, what I observed is that the participant. So actually, when people come across each other, even in real life, and they have to avoid each other, they don't really look at each other, especially when they're getting close. They don't really look at each other. The decision of where they might go is decided way before they reach each other, and that's how the participant in the one-man crowd paradigm, how they judge the movement of the characters, because they feel somehow that the characters are just ignoring the existence of the user, so they made their own decision directly. They can see that the character is looking at some other direction, so they would imagine that the character doesn't see the participant themselves. So the participant would say, well, I would choose the other way.
Okay. Okay, so that's my notes. Okay, so two more things. Regarding the scenarios you picked, I think Bill already mentioned why exactly you went into those scenarios, because they were relatively complex. But more than that, why exactly are the scenarios different between Chapter 3 and Chapter 4? Is there any reason for changing the scenarios when you did the second contribution in your thesis?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so for the first contribution, you had these scenarios where people walk in a single flow. They walk in a circle, or they walk to get through a narrow corridor. And the third case is they walk into this small room / elevator kind of situation. However, on the second contribution, you're doing the walking in bidirectional flow kind of thing, like walking in opposite directions, crossing a circle, and doing a proper crossing. So why did you pick two completely different scenarios for the second contribution? Is there any reason?
Because basically after the first contribution, we believe that our result is sufficient to justify the use of the one-man crowd paradigm for the movement where basically everybody is working toward the same destination. So basically, even though there might still be, for example, the bottleneck scenario, there might be interactions from the left and right, they're finally going to walk to the same direction. So we believe the use of the one-man crowd paradigm for this kind of scenario can be justified. Somehow, there are disadvantages, but it's still okay. But the real challenge would come from the multi-directional interaction, where you have people coming from an entire different direction and which is going to an entire different direction. That's where we see that there will be that's where the phenomenon that the participant walks straight forward at the very beginning of the capture is the most impacting. So we believe that it would be important to tackle this challenge, this limitation.
Okay, and the other thing would be picking again on the choice of scenarios. The one that kind of simulates people walking in an elevator. No, you had quite nice results, but in this type of situation where it's a very close environment, people typically, they don't just simply walk in and pick a location. They tend to readjust their location based on how many people is walking into the elevator, for example. No? So as more people walks in, we start reducing clearance with others. But with your one-man crowd paradigm, you cannot reposition people. So why exactly picking this scenario when it's something that requires an iterative process?
I think the reason why I picked this scenario is that we replicate this experiment from a real world experiment. And what we have understood from that experiment is that the participants, when they have finally chosen their standing position, they wouldn't really move too much anymore. They might lean their body forward and backwards like people go, but they don't really move a lot anymore. So we wanted to test this scenario by assuming that static body animation, static idle animation would be enough to replicate the situation.
Okay.
But now that I reconsider this experience, I would agree that the liking of this tiny interaction might have been the reason. Well, it's a reason that why our results shows different patterns compared to the real situation.
Right, it's just what I was saying, like I noticed in your videos that sometimes when the elevator or the room starts getting filled up, other people that would walk in would kind of walk around, try to find the gap. And that's not often what happens. What happens typically is people move away to leave space to the new people coming in. So it would be very difficult or pretty much impossible to replicate with the first contribution. Okay, so I don't have many more questions, but I'm more a curiosity. So two curiosities. First of all, you've captured a very large amount of motion capture data during these experiments. And as you said at the beginning, there is a lot of data available regarding local movement, people moving around a crowd, because there's been track trajectories and that data has been made available to the general public. But there's really no data regarding full body motion capture when walking through a crowd. So are you planning at any stage to publish that information, that database? Do you think could be a nice contribution for the community, for other people working on how people body movement changes, maybe based on density or based on whether they're walking in a single flow of traffic or opposite flow of traffic or things like that? I mean, I don't know whether your data has exclusively the motion capture data, or it also can be connected to how many of the people there's around them, how many people are walking against them or in their same direction. No idea.
I might have missed the question part of this comment.
So the motion capture data you have captured, all the hours and hours of data you have of motion capture, yes, like full body animation, are you planning to do that, to put that publicly available for other researchers?
I would be happy to make that available, but we'll have to check with my supervisors whether the ethical approval has approved us to do so. It's funny that I talk about the ethical issues for all the other method approaches, but at the end, when we try to open source the data, we have to go through this again. So,
well, theoretically now, I think for all new European projects, there's this data management plan that we have to make the data publicly available for replicability purposes. So I think in the future we're going to move in that direction anyway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just the last comment. Once again, regarding the full body motion capture, in previous work by Julian's group, they had studied, for example, when walking through a static crowd in the paper they had on train station, they had studied, for instance, how much torso movement, like how much body movement there was when walking through the crowd. However, in this work for your PhD thesis, all the body movement seems to have been ignored for the purpose of getting results. I assume it's because you are your validation is comparing against real world data, and you don't have that kind of information from the real world data, so there will be nothing to compare against. But if you study the full body movement, like how much torso rotation you had in your different conditions, could you tell whether people seem to behave in a more realistic way depending on the type of condition they were testing? So maybe in the one-man crowd, you experience that people seem to respond or to move less their upper body than when they're walking against the reactive crowd because it has, I don't know, more collision avoidance, for example.
Well, this question makes me think of, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Finished? Okay. This question makes me think about a work published by our former colleague, Vincenzo, who seems to have established, well, I didn't follow too deep in his work, but who seems to have established some sort of a metric to evaluate the motion of the captured animation. And so if I'm going to make evaluation on this, I think I'll start from that paper.
Okay. I'm going to leave it there because I think I'm past my 15 minutes of questions. So good work, Tairan.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nuria. So before leaving the floor to the supervisors, I'm going to make some comments and also ask very limited questions. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. Thanks also to the supervisors for inviting me today. It was a real pleasure to hear you, to attend the restaurants earlier on and test this real co-presence at the restaurant and also being here today. So it's been a pleasure to hear you. It was a very clear presentation, super well illustrated. The videos were very impressive and very complementary to the manuscript.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. And regarding the one-man crowd concept is a super simple and very clever idea, which is opening a lot of novel research questions and a new research path. So it's congratulations for this really high novelty of this concept. And then after you have successfully implemented it in sophisticated technological platforms, then you have conducted a series of user experiments, well conducted, and then we have a lot of in-depth and informative data analysis after, made at different levels, individual and group levels. So it's very informative in the end. And I could try the demo, by the way, and I tried the concert demo where your own motion can be used to animate all the people attending to a virtual concert. And then you are on stage and you are looking at the audience and you see all those people dancing the way you danced earlier on, right? That was really fun. So it's very convincing in the end. And so I don't have many questions, but I'm probably going to paraphrase a lot of questions that were asked before. But I was curious about your analysis of what is doable and not doable with the one-man crowd, and basically what is you would think of the killer application of the one-man crowd. So the best application for this, and on the contrary, what you believe in the situation where you should not use this technique, it's not very meaningful in the end.
Well, at the current stage of the one-man crowd paradigm, I think the killer app, do we have to restrict the answer of this question to in the academia area?
Maybe no, outside.
Okay.
I mean, not necessarily only inside academia, of course.
So I think the killer application at the current stage of the one-man crowd paradigm would be a bit more the side of industries. I think it's exactly the demo that you have tried to create animations for multiple characters in a scene within a short time, within a quite efficient manner. I think that would ease the making of animation, the authoring of animation in a lot of cases for the industry. So I think that's the killer application. And let's say the most useless application of the one-man crowd would be, I think, specifically under the crowd movements and specifically under the stressful scenarios, because that would involve a lot of body movement. That would involve a lot of physical contacts between people, which is not doable right now. with this version of the one-man crowd paradigm.
And then one thing in the concert demo, the funny thing consists in trying to identify in the crowd
Yes.
who is matching your own motion, right? And who is not matching your own motion. And you can actually quite rapidly identify the virtual characters which are reflecting your previous movements, right? So there is also this line of research in perception of the final crowd, right?
Yeah.
So I was curious from your experience, what's the resulting perception of the virtual crowd which is animated by one single user? Are there some characteristics in terms of perception behind?
I think that the last thing that we need to consider here is the individual animation of each character, and the concern will mostly focus on the emergent pattern, I would say, of the crowd. So basically, imagine that you see the circle scenario where people follow each other. Naturally, you would expect to see this propagation of stop and go wave along the circle. I'm sorry, but if they don't have this phenomenon, if this phenomenon doesn't emerge, then you might begin to ask questions whether this is you might don't think it's not real, but you might think there's something weird in the animation. So I think, especially when we simulate a crowd for animations, usually you show the animation to people from a very long distance. You want to show the entire crowd in front of people, so you put the camera far away from the crowd, where people don't really see the local behavior anymore. They see the collective movement of the crowd. So, which makes the realism of the collective movement quite important at the end.
Thank you. And I was curious to know if because you published somehow only 2 papers, but it's great papers. I'm not commenting on this, but maybe there are something that you didn't have time to publish for some reasons, because it was not, the paper was already too large, or you didn't have time to collect this, and that you would like to report today. Is there something that you couldn't publish, but actually you would have liked to show?
We don't explicitly have anything that I couldn't publish, which is, when I was writing the thesis, I did spend a lot of time on the state of art chapter, and I think, and I realized that although there are so many reviews on the crowd data, crowd behavior studies, I don't really see any review or survey on the capture of crowd. I'd say there are a lot of the short answer is that I hope that at some point I can transform the state of the art, the chapter, into some sort of review. But the idea is not yet clear. I was trying to talk with somebody who knows more capturing crowd motion from field observation, reconstructing the body motion using all this state of the art computer vision techniques. But I didn't have time to chat with them, so this is a personal project that I didn't mention to Julien for now. But yes.
Okay, thanks. And my last double question is just, could you comment on your best memory of your PhD thesis, the best and the worst memory? One best and worst memory. You can take one joker, you can say, okay, I'm not answering to this one.
Yeah, I think the well, it's a tricky question because I think the best memory of my PhD thesis comes after the publication of the first paper, and this makes me think about the Collide project, the European project that I'm inside, and the best moment was a moment where I got the paper published. I was able to talk to people coming from so many different research institutes, and realizing that so much people working on the same goal to make the simulation, the generation of human behavior better and better. And I had the chance to exchange with people. I had the chance to travel around for all these workshops so there are several best moments of the PhD. And the worst moment would be during the last several months of the second paper. It was like we were trying to figure out what are the most important impact of the contribution. And from time to time, I'm not sure about the contribution or the impact of the contribution, because I was more or less working alone, and you don't really have too much feedback from the community. And I have my supervisors who keep saying that you're doing a great job. What you're studying is quite influential. Well, it would be meaningful, and it's important your work. But I don't hear that from the other person. So I was like, yeah, they're my supervisors. They're going to say that all the time. But what exactly is the situation? I think, and that was a bit suffering at the moment, especially I was. We tried to at the first moment. I think at the beginning we were saying we're going to submit that paper to TVCG directly, and then we couldn't make it. So that though my exploration in the analysis keeps growing and growing and growing, and I don't see the end of the thing. And that moment was a bit tricky.
Thank you. So now it's the time for the supervisor to say a word. So we start with Marc Christie from University of Rennes, Associate Professor.
Thanks. So it's going to be quite short on my side. So I've been only following the work from a distance. I was more involved in the first year of the PhD, but taking a few steps back, so I'm really impressed by your commitment in exploring this topic and the amount of work that has been done. And there were two interesting aspects in which I want to highlight. The first is that I think you've been having a very deep exploration of this topic, which, as Anatole mentioned, is a simple and very neat idea, but you really went into a deep understanding of the outputs and possible outcomes of this, and you successfully answered to a number of hypotheses, but you also opened a lot of research questions, and I think that's a very good spirit you have. And the second aspect, and it's one that I appreciated very much when we worked together at the beginning, is your will to have a very good paper. You understood that it's important, and you wanted to get what are the keys for a good paper. What should I write? How should I write? What are the results? How they should be presented. And I think that's also a very, very good strength that you have. You have this tenacious curiosity about making your work better, and I think it's a great quality. I just want to end with one point. I very much appreciated your performance of a zombie. Did you try to record it in OMC so you could see what it gives?
Yeah, well, that's actually because at the last minute, Ludovic asked me to add some illustration of the limitation. I also think I don't have time to do that, so I'm going to perform it directly.
Very good.
So first, I would like to thank all the jury members for participating in this viva. Of course, Bill and Anthony for reviewing the PhD, but as well Ioannis and Nuria for participating in the defense. Now for Tairan, I will add as well to the congratulations on the quality of your presentation. For me, it's really illustrative of kind of your personality and how it's been all through these 3 years. Every time we had meetings, it was like you had ideas, you came with questions, you were organized in the way you were presenting your problems and in discussing what you are trying to do. So it was really always really organized and clear. And we really, as Marc was saying, we could really sense your interest in learning to do and trying to discover this new world of research. So it's really been a pleasure to work with you on this topic for the last 3 years.
Thanks.
I'm sure Julien will add to this as well, but we also have to remind that you're one of the students who started right during the lockdown in 2020. You started to work on the one-man crowd from your apartment, taking into your hands the technical elements. He's doing VR. He has a headset. He's at home. He's working on crowd motion capture during lockdown. There are problems related to animation, live motion capture. So lots and lots of technical elements to take into account. And as soon as you come back to the lab, you start experiments with people. So it's, I think that's also, we can also see that your first paper in 2022 in IEEE VR is also due to your dedication and the time and energy that you took in learning this new field and in proposing new technical solutions as well as scientific evaluations of the work. Because, as you mentioned, you spent a lot of time as well analyzing the data. Up to some point, we had to say, okay, let's stop and publish because we could actually keep looking into it. So for me, a real congratulations. It's been a pleasure to work with you for the last 3 years, and I hope you the best for the rest of your career.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ludovic Hoyet, research scientist at Inria Rennes. And now it's time for the directors, the two directors of the PhD thesis to say a word. So we can start with Marie-Paule Cani, professor at École Polytechnique. Marie-Paule?
So first of all, I'd like to thank Julien and his colleagues to include me in this supervision team. And so it was my first experience to co-supervise a PhD in virtual reality related to motion capture in virtual reality. And I would like most of all to thank Tairan for his excellent work, very serious, and he always wanted to learn. He was really careful in his work. He tried always to be autonomous before asking us, and he focused on the quality rather than on the quantity of work, which is not so common. So really, congratulations to you, Tairan, for all this. You can be proud of your work. I still have a question for you, because you know I'm a remote advisor, so we didn't have the opportunity to exchange in the last few weeks. So as you know, your team is now focusing on dense crowds, and I was wondering if dense crowds was not one of the main limitations of your crowd motion capture system. You visited my group, and I was wondering, you know, for the moment, you generate motion with interpenetration in the last solution you have for this crowd. And so the user you said that they're annoyed by the fact that suddenly there is another character crossing them. I was wondering if you think that it would be interesting to extend this to make the user feel as if he was pushed back by the other agent, by combining what you do with Paul Boursin's solution, you know, in virtual reality, with the controller between the physically based avatar of the character. So could you comment on that?
Well, I have to mention that at some point during this PhD, I noticed that in our team there was one sub work by Florian and Fabien, where they have already applied the haptic rendering on the participant's body to somehow visualize the touching and the physical feedback in the crowd. And at some point, I was thinking that maybe it would be good to add this as well, but I didn't at the end because considering the amount of work, considering the fact that I will have to deal with 3 different hardware system, which would make the system super complicated to use, I didn't do that. But so with the knowledge of this paper, with me being aware of the existence of this paper, I think the solution already exists. It's just a matter of implementing the solution in the dense crowd.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marie-Paule. And the last speaker today is the second director of the thesis, Julien Pettré, senior researcher at Inria Rennes.
Thank you. So let me first thank the jury as well to be there, to have made this hard work on evaluating your thesis. And we had very interesting questions today, reports sooner. So that's very, so I think this is confirming you that you are on a path which is promising, and I hope I will take it out of this lab and make it alive somewhere where you will be. I'm sure you will. You are heading for a career of this kind where you can explore more of these questions. I hope so. Most of the positive comments I wanted to make today was already stolen by my colleagues. I fully agree with them. You're rigorous. You're a hard worker. You want to learn. You're very positive. That's very a pleasure working with you. During coffee breaks with Ludo, we were after our meetings we're like, yeah, this is a great collaboration we have with you. That's important today for you to know about that. Yes, I wanted to remind that you started this PhD during lockdown, the hard one. So we met, I think, 3 minutes. Your first day, I gave you a computer and say, okay, bye-bye. Go home and see you next year, maybe. You need some motivation to work like this, and you were successful, and Ludo detailed very nicely how it happened. So I don't have that much to add on this, but we had to shift a bit the ideas we had for your topic, and we adjusted, you adjusted, and that went well. The idea of the one-man crowd existed before the lockdown, I should say it. There was some intern doing very first version that you benefited from, but that was relevant to explore this more. I want to. So it has been said a couple of times that there is only 2 papers, but they are good ones. They were awarded both. They are high quality, and I want to also detail a bit the reason for that. You mentioned the ITN CLIPE project that took off your 3 years' time. I mean, you went abroad, 3 months there, 3 months here. You went to Golem, you went in different places. That's not accelerating the research work, but it's good for you. You did so. And also at some point, after the first paper, as you mentioned, we let you, so we noticed the autonomy that you had, and we wanted you to decide on the next research question you want to address. And you touched a number of subjects here. So we explored like maybe 3 different ones. I remember those meetings where we were asking you about your progress in what you think about this or that subject and which one you want to pick in the end. And so this second paper, contribution, is fully your choice. And I think this is important to people to be aware of this. And yes, for us, it's a lot of frustration because everything else is untouched or unpublished or unexplored, and that's. And I think we have understood that there were some easy paths here. There's some ways to get fancy results, but maybe not that interesting. And we did not pick this option. But there are untouched, very interesting questions that have been asked here, and I really hope that you will note them and remind them. So I would like to conclude by saying that there was one sentence always coming back in our meetings. This was "J'ai pas compris," and and I think there were 2 reasons you were saying this often. So first, we were having our meeting in French, and you wanted to learn French, and you are more comfortable in French than in English. It should be noted. So sometimes it was about a word that you did not get. Sometimes it was about an idea. And I mean, that was super important for us to clarify our own ideas and to go deeper into this, say, okay, if it doesn't understand, this is because it's not clear, and it should be clear. And then I think that was part of yeah, this is something you should not lose and keep doing.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much.
May I just make a quick comment on this? I never really hesitate to ask to say that I didn't understand, because at some point I realized that there are so many French PhD students here who are speaking French with their supervisor, and they wouldn't dare ask that question because they interpret what they say and what the supervisor says. But at some point I realized that I don't really interpret that because I don't have that much background in the French culture. So at some point I failed to interpret the supervisor, and it's actually a good thing because that allows me to ask this question fearlessly, to say that I don't understand, but I don't really care. So
keep doing this.
Okay, so it's time to close this part of the defense. Marie-Paule, Anthony, Nuria, so you disconnect from this WebEx and you connect to the other one, where we're going to meet soon for the deliberation of the jury, and we will be back in this room after for the result.
Okay.
On va le lire. Non, c'est bon, hein.
Oui, j'imagine.
En attendant, on admire le... C'est le Mont-Saint-Michel, là.
Demande-lui si c'est lui.
Did you take this picture?
Yeah, my picture.
Really nice one.
Yeah.
Ok, Marie-Paule, tu nous entends?
Oui, désolé pour le retard de connexion.
Ouais, super. En tout cas, voilà, tout le monde est là. Okay, so Tairan, you presented your work in English, your third language, in 45 minutes in a very clear presentation. The jury found it well thought, well structured, very well illustrated, notably by a series of high quality graphics and videos that overall could effectively well complement the manuscript and highlight the main contributions of the PhD thesis. The result that you presented today is really raising the interest and complexity of using VR technologies for the simulation of virtual crowds. We are highlighting the jury the high novelty of the one-man crowd concept, where crowd animation is constructed with the recordings from a single or maybe a few users. It's a very simple, at least it looks simple, but it's a very clever idea, which is opening up a wide range of research prospects and questions. And this idea has been successfully implemented in sophisticated technological platforms, then evaluated in a series of well-conducted user studies, and this all lead to very informative data analysis made at both individual and group level. So overall, this work and the subsequent large quantity of data produced could serve as a very useful entry point for future designers and developers interested in crowd simulations. During the question and answer session, the jury found that you have answered to the numerous queries in a very careful and rigorous way, and that you somehow demonstrated a very good grasp of your subject and of your results, and also the acquisition of confirmed knowledge in the various disciplines covered by your thesis. So overall, and I'm going to say this in French because you understand it very well and that it's required in France, le jury est unanime pour que te soit décerné le grade de docteur de l'Université de Rennes dans la spécialité informatique. Félicitations.
Merci.
And so at the end of the PhD defense in France now, there's a little text that you can decide or not to pronounce. What's your decision?
Well, I decide not to pronounce it.
Okay. So.
No, I decided to pronounce it, of course.
Ah, no, sorry. I said you didn't pronounce? Ah, no, okay. Okay. Yeah, okay. J'ai pas compris. Ok, c'est comme le...
C'est là.
you can use or the English version or the French version, this part or this part. Up to you.
Which this part or this part?
Yeah, French or English, you choose.
Commencez par parvenu.
Tu veux faire en français?
Ouais.
Ok, alors ça commence ici, ça termine là.
D'accord. Okay, so since I've done this PhD in France and I really appreciate the language, this language and the culture in this country, I'm going to do this in French. En présence de mes pairs, parvenu à l'issue de mon doctorat en... Pourquoi il y a un X ici? En informatique, ok. Donc, parvenu à l'issue de mon doctorat en informatique et ayant ainsi pratiqué dans ma quête du savoir l'exercice d'une recherche scientifique exigeante, en cultivant la rigueur intellectuelle, la réflexivité éthique et dans le respect des principes de l'intégrité scientifique. Je m'engage pour ce qui dépendra de moi dans la suite de ma carrière professionnelle, quel que soit le secteur ou le domaine d'activité, à maintenir une conduite intègre dans mon rapport au savoir, mes méthodes et mes résultats.